listening to Rev and the Rest with your host, The Rev. In this episode, I'm doing an interview with the Bloodstained Men and Their Friends. The Bloodstained Men and Their Friends are an intactivist organization. I was lucky enough to get an interview with one of their members and to be able to learn a lot more. I hope you guys enjoy this episode and find some of our information be enlightening.
Hey, Harry, how are you? Tell me more about the group you're with.
Hi there. My name's Harry Guiremand, and I'm with the Bloodstained Men and Their Friends. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to teaching people about the harms of infant circumcision.
Okay, interesting. And I understand you guys travel all around the United States and try to talk to people, and you also have certain uniforms?
Yeah, we've been to almost, I think, every state except Alaska and Hawaii now, and we have been to hundreds of cities. And we do tours in a region. Our next tour will be in just focused on Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. So we'll go all around the state of Pennsylvania. And we wear a white outfit with a red blood stain on the crotch to illustrate the wound and the harm of genital cutting.
Yeah. And, I saw Bloodstained Men myself in person. I definitely saw your guys' outfits really, really caught the eye of a lot of people. And, I like the fact that Bloodstained Men uses shock value. And then, while they're using shock, they also have, normative signs that also show some of the harm done by infant circumcision. So
yeah, you got to get people's attention. And so you got to have that initial shock to get their attention. And then you can start the educating process. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, exactly. I myself am in favor of male genitals. And the thing is with circumcision, I was shocked to find out that there were actual groups about this back in 2016 when I first found Bloodstained Men. I definitely was very shocked to see that, this isn't just like people think this, there's actual activism being done about it, and people are spreading this information as opposed to some guy just having to kind of look behind the scenes a little.
Right. I mean, people have been writing scholarly texts about this for years, and people have been protesting since the 70s. Mm-hmm. The first protest we know that in America was in, I think, 1972 in Tallahassee, Florida. Mm-hmm. Those guys got arrested and went to jail because Tallahassee was not ready for such a protest. Mm-hmm. But and we have gotten arrested too at times, but we do everything we can to make sure we can do our protest without any incident. Mm-hmm. But sometimes you have somebody who wants to exert authority, which they don't really have because it's a free speech right to be on the street and make your point. We're Americans.
On a public sidewalk, that's one thing, groups that, spread heinous messages, there are various racist organizations or, even the Westboro Baptist Church. They often will use public sidewalks because of the fact that public sidewalks are quote unquote a free speech zone,
Right. So, yeah, we've been compared to them, but we really are nothing like those people. I mean, our message is protecting people from harm, and we don't go out of our way to antagonize people like they do.
Yeah,
it's a secular message. It's not really based on religious belief. It's based on human rights.
Yeah, I have friends that are pagan. They're in favor of intact genitalia. I have friends that are atheists. They're in favor of that. I myself am a Christian, and I'm in favor of that. I definitely see that there is a lot of harm that can be done to it, and there's so many myths and stuff like that. And I debunked a lot of them in this paper I wrote my senior year after I found the Bloodstained Men. I wrote a paper on circumcision.
Oh, wonderful!
I ironically titled it "You Want a Piece of Me."
Brilliant.
Yeah,
brilliant. I hadn't heard that before. That's excellent.
Yeah. I make jokes about it all the time because of the fact that I've also found that humor kind of deactivates some of the hatred and contention. It kind of surrounds, anger.
Right. The trouble with humor has been in the past. Humorists have generally tried to trivialize circumcision, mm-hmm. and you really shouldn't trivialize child abuse.
Yeah.
And because you're enabling it. If you trivialize harm, it's just like if you joked about rape, it would be like saying, well, rapists are okay. And you don't want to in any way enable them. So for me, it's really hard to use humor because it's like, well, you don't want to be trivializing it. And so it's a yeah, but I mean, if you can do it in a productive way, good for you, because it's hard. It's really
Yeah,
hard to do
it
that.
is very hard. Like one argument I get, is that the foreskin is less likely to get infected. When you're talking, I mean, like when you cut it off, the foreskin is less likely to get infected. And I'm like, well, if I, like one joke I make back, I'm like, well, if I chop off my arm, I'm less likely to break the bones in it. It's like, sure, it's less likely to
Right.
get infected, but that's because it's no longer there.
Yeah, the logic is just amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
one of the myths, I mean, I know this is false myself because I've done research on the topic, but one of the myths that's often popular is, circumcision makes, like is actually helpful to you.
yeah. It's harmful. I mean, every body part is there with a function. It's evolution produced all of our body parts for because they support our life,
Hmm.
and it's there for a reason.
Hmm.
And it provides sexual pleasure. It provides natural lubrication,
Hmm.
and it makes sex more pleasant. I mean, I don't know who wants sex to be less pleasant, and it also
Hmm.
makes sex more pleasant for your partner
Hmm.
because of the gliding action of the foreskin makes the whole process more pleasant. And so it's like, why would you cut off the body part that makes you feel good and makes your partner feel good? I mean, that
Yeah.
doesn't make sense.
It's 12 that I if I remember correctly, the number is like 12,000 nerves are in the foreskin. And
Right.
it's
Yeah.
basically the same as like breaking a fingernail off as opposed to, just like maybe like a paper cut, and people are like, well, infants can't remember that. And I'm like, that doesn't mean that it's not painful or could even be traumatizing. And in some cases, I mean, you do see infants dying, because of botched circumcision procedures.
Right. So any surgery has the risk of infection and or bleeding
Hmm.
and death. I mean that, and we don't have good statistics on it because the circumcision industry prevents these statistics from being collected. We
Yeah.
don't really know
Yeah.
how bad it is, but various people have tried to estimate it, and they come up with a number between 100 and 200 American babies die every year from circumcision.
Hmm.
We should have that exact number, and if the medical profession weren't corrupt, we
Hmm.
would. But
Yeah.
they're supporting this corrupt practice by not divulging the harm they do.
Now I understand that there's a lot of money to be made in that too. Is that right?
Yeah, it's $1 billion industry
Yeah.
because they're paid to do the cutting. They sell the foreskin, and the foreskin's very valuable to tissue engineering companies, and
Hmm.
other organizations use them, and it's very valuable.
Hmm. What do they use
So,
it
they
for?
don't tell. Well, they make artificial skin products,
Hmm.
and they make a lot of these little discs of skin of cultured skin,
Hmm.
and those discs sell for about $300 each, and they make hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of material of these skin uh,
Hmm.
cultured skin products from one foreskin. So
Hmm.
hundreds of thousands of dollars. The parents aren't being told that this is something very valuable that they want from your son, and that they're going to sell it to somebody else as soon as they cut it off your boy. They don't know that. I mean, they
Hmm.
sign the consent form and they say tissue can be reused or whatever, but they don't understand what's going on.
Yeah, most
A
people
part of their
probably
baby is
assume.
being stolen.
Yeah, most people probably assume it's for like research purposes or something. They're not really like digging behind the scenes. I know that myself in my situation, my parents were very, oh, it's healthy for him, and also given my parents, my dad's side is very ethnically Jewish, my that's part of why, a lot of it is due to tradition. And then, given the my great grandfather, when he found out, because he was, very Jewish towards the end of his life, he was like quite pleased with the fact that I was circumcised. But people don't really understand the
Were you
harm.
ritually circumcised?
No, no,
Were you
it was,
circumcised in a ritual? No, in a hospital.
yeah, yeah, in the
And
hospital.
was your father beyond being, was he religiously Jewish or just cultural or just
My
ethnically?
my parents are more just like they're more so generic believers. They don't really practice much, but they're like, oh yeah, we believe it at the end of the day. But
So you were basically raised in the Jewish religion and became a Christian later?
I have like my parents weren't really like raising me in the Jewish religion, but it's like the generic belief that you should, and that's our ethnic background and stuff like that. My
Yeah.
mom's side's the Christian side, actually. My mom's side's Christian. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's good you got exposed to
Mhm.
both ideas.
Yeah. And most people they think, like people that are intactivists are often anti-Semitic when in fact we're not, if I mean it's more so just about
Right.
the procedure. So in regards to circumcision in the United States, you know how it got started, right?
Right. So in terms of, I mean, religious circumcision had been going on from the beginning, but in the 19th century, it was introduced as under a medical context.
Mm-hmm.
And because at that time they didn't have the germ theory of disease, they didn't know what caused diseases, and they thought it was nervous excitation. And so they wrongfully, and this was at the same time of a Victorian masturbation hysteria, and so they believed that the excitation of masturbation caused disease, and so uh, John Harvey Kellogg introduced circumcision as a way to punish a boy from masturbating, because by causing as much pain as possible and making it harder for him to masturbate.
Mm-hmm.
And he also had a cure for girls who masturbated by pouring acid on their clitoris.
Mm-hmm.
So this was quack medicine, pure quackery from the 19th century. But once it started to become a profitable procedure, they kept coming up with new excuses to keep it going. And those continue to this day. But it's absolute quackery, always has been.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I know also Kellogg was very into manipulating diets. He thought, a bland diet would kind of slow down one's libido. And, in fact, that's not really the case. He just had all sorts of weird ideas on sexuality as opposed to actually getting stuff accomplished. He more so it was more so, like a way of limiting sexuality without, shame. It was more so just to do it, physically, as opposed to taking a toll and having social repercussions or mental repercussions.
Right. And graham flour was supposed to
Yeah,
reduce sexual desire. So that's how we got graham crackers. It's
exactly.
just, it's hilarious. There's all this craziness is still with us in one form or another. It just, they were
Cornflakes
just
and
in the
s'mores.
dark. They did.
Cornflakes and s'mores ruined for us forever. Yeah, I'm shocked
Yeah.
that that Kellogg, like most people just see the last name on a cereal box and that's it. They don't actually know like who Kellogg really was. They're just like, oh, like cornflakes, frosted flakes, various other cereals, and they're just like, okay, but they don't really look at like why Kellogg developed some of them the way he did. It's not that cornflakes were just like, oh, this is good and I can make money off of the food industry. It's more like, hey, it was served to patients to limit things.
Right. But once they had a product they could sell and it was successful, that was great. They had a roaring business going, which, it's a huge industry still today. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember reading about Brother K. The one of the higher ups in Bloodstained Men. He actually was he was basically a pioneer in intactivism.
right. Back in the 70s, he and his wife then, or his partner then, they protested circumcision in California in the mid 70s, I think, and were, I think, the first on the West Coast to do a street protest against circumcision.
Mm-hmm.
And they got in the newspaper. They got AP Wire picked it up, and the story went out. But in spite of getting news, and we get lots of news coverage when we go out, it's still a uphill battle helping people to understand that this is a problem that needs urgent attention.
Exactly. Most people don't quite conceptualize. I was shocked to find out other people in my area, some friends of mine were like, yeah, I'm against it too. And I was like, wow, like you typically don't see that a lot. You see a lot of American moms just kind of go along with it. And then I found, one of my friends who's a mom, she's like, no, I'm against it. And I was like, wow. She's like, good for you for, being on the right side.
Yeah, it's always good to find a young mom who just is they're so fiery and when they are against it, they're really against it. So they understand they're protecting their boy and their child, and that's a mother's first duty is to protect her child. So they get it.
Yeah, exactly. And most people, in the US, I've heard people say, like negative things that kind of are prejudice against men with foreskins, and they're like, oh, that's just, that doesn't look right. And it's like, well, that's actually how it's supposed to look. It's just the American norm is to have a man that's circumcised down there. And that's why, like whenever you see something foreign, it's kind of just, you kind of like scratch your head, but then sometimes, because of the fact that things are foreign to you, you want to reject them. But that's not really the case. That's not why we should do that.
Yeah. Americans often think we do everything right, better than everyone else. And American exceptionalism. Exactly.
It tends to be very toxic, like they're always like, oh, this won't work. And then I'm like, well, in other countries, it's working fine. Well, we don't need to look at other countries. This is America, and it's like, you're like, since the start, the founding fathers, that's what their whole shtick was looking at other countries, seeing what they were doing right, and then doing that. Our American exceptionalism often just leaves us so far behind. We were one of the last Western nations to get rid of slavery. It was just crazy.
Right.
It's like, yeah, it's wrong. They're doing something else because they're different than us.
Yeah, I think steal good ideas wherever you can find them. If somebody over there is doing it better than I'm doing it, I want to copy them. I mean, it's like, why, stay in a rut when you can make progress?
Yeah, exactly.
And
you look across the world, and it's like, most, European nations, they're not circumcised. Circumcision, it's just so rare to see in Europe. It's not very popular in Europe, whereas in America, it's like we tend to capitalize on it as opposed to just kind of recognizing, that everyone should be the same way. And I understand that female circumcision is also illegal in the United States.
Right. So this is a long story. In 1996, there was the FGM bill. So the bill to make female genital mutilation illegal in the United States. Prior to that, there was no federal law against it. And going back to 1977, Blue Cross insurance actually covered female circumcision. So it was actually performed and covered by insurance in America until the 70s. So this law was debated, and at the time, the intactivists were saying, "Well, wait a minute. Boys have to be protected too. We need equal rights under the law here." But the law was passed without equal protection under the law. So it's unconstitutional in that way, because the Constitution says we have a right to equal protection under the law. So if you protect girls, you got to protect boys. So far, that hasn't been challenged. The law was challenged a few years ago, and then there was a very strange ruling that found that it violated interstate commerce, which was really odd, when the real glaring defect is that it doesn't provide equal protection under the law.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was found unconstitutional under that rubric, and then the Congress immediately fixed the law so that it would be in effect again. So it's in effect again. And the FGM law is perfect in every way. I mean, it's really just brilliant, except that it's not gender neutral. It doesn't cover both sexes. That's all we ask. Include us, and we're happy.
Yeah. Now I hold the stance myself, it's like, I don't think it should be done on boys, but like once you consent, you're 18. It's like, I personally think, if you want to cut, your foreskin off and you're 18 and you can consent to it, it's like, that's your business. I don't see why you would, but it's like, you want to do it, that's your issue, Whereas
Right.
as an infant, I can't really consent to such a procedure. That's not really helpful to me. It's not just, like, if like an infant has some sort of heart surgery, it's like that's one thing, because of the fact that it's productive, it's life-saving, stuff like that, whereas cutting off the foreskin doesn't really do anything. In fact, it's counterproductive. It makes it more likely for you to get infected down there, as opposed to actually saving your life. So what are your stances regarding the legality of infant circumcision and what we should do about it?
Well, Peter Adler, who's a professor of law in Massachusetts, wrote a very interesting paper called "Is Circumcision Legal?" And he concludes that it's not legal today under existing laws. So this is a top-notch legal scholar who says no, it's not legal already. It's already illegal. So it's not like we're trying to change the law. We're just trying to people to understand what the law is already. And so it's already illegal and should not be done. It's a criminal assault and should be prosecuted.
How would you say it's interpreted in the law? You know, like, I mean, maybe my knowledge is very limited on various laws, but you know, it's like I don't think that, you know, the infant male circumcision is explicitly in the law books, is it?
So you have a right to privacy, which is recognized by the law. You have the right, which means that your private parts belong to you. You have a right to security of person, or right to bodily integrity. This is the most fundamental human right, and the law is built on these rights. Consent. When a parent consents to surgery on a dependent child, that surgery has to be done because it's necessary for the life of the child. There has to be an urgent need to intervene in order to consent to an amputation on a child. And there's no urgent need. The child is perfectly healthy. And furthermore, when you have proxy consent, it has to be based on what you would expect the patient would want if they could express their consent. And what we know is that intact men almost never choose to be circumcised. So we know the expectation is not that they want to be cut. The expectation is that they don't want to be cut.
I wish I were cut, you know.
Exactly. And so the consent is invalid. They can't claim that they've had valid consent because there was no urgent need. It's not consistent with the expected will of the patient. And so it just shouldn't, they can't say that they've gained consent for this surgery. It's done without proper consent. And so that's another legal problem with infant circumcision as it's practiced in America today.
Yeah, and now you know, this is probably going to be a big issue, is, you know, circumcision religiously speaking.
Right. So this is, you know, first, before you talk about religion, you have to remember that 98 or something, it's just a very high percent is non-religious. So that's the religious aspect is a small part. Even amongst Jews, the latest data we have is that 70% of Jewish or boys born into Jewish families, because they haven't really picked a religion yet, but boys born into Jewish families, 70% are cut in a non-ritual situation. You know, that's what happened to you in a hospital, in a secular, non-religious thing. So now the number of actual ritual circumcisions in America is very, very small. And so if we could get all of the non-ritual circumcision dealt with, we would be almost to our goal. And it raises a lot of hackles when you talk about religion, but you have to, when you think about freedom of religion, it means that nobody can force you to join a religion. And if you cut your religion into a helpless child's body, you're violating his freedom of religion, because he may say, well, you know, I didn't want that. I'm a Buddhist. Why did you make me look like a Jew? I'm a Buddhist.
You know,
and so it's violating his freedom of religion.
Yeah, with certain, you know, ceremonies I've seen, you know, like from a non-religious standpoint, you know, baptism, it doesn't permanently alter the body. You know, I mean, if you really think about it, you know, you're wet for a little bit, you know, you're dried off, whatever. You know, it's like you can basically undo the baptism, or if you don't believe in it, you know, it's like, all right, my parents, you know, a guy in a uniform put some water on me and that's it. Whereas, you know, like circumcision, it's like a whole piece of my body was just cut off. Right.
And you can't regrow it. And so you can't undo the damage. And that's a huge difference.
I know
Excuse me, that's a huge difference.
I know there's an artificial way of, like recreating the foreskin, but it's not quite the same.
Right, and it's called foreskin restoration, and we understand that hundreds of thousands, or at least 100,000 foreskin restoration devices have been sold in the United States in the since they started selling them. So we know that lots of men are doing this, and I've seen men who've restored their foreskin, and it looks quite, it looks like the real thing. That you don't get the nerve endings back; those are gone forever. There's muscles that are gone forever. There's other, there's glands in there that is, those are gone forever. But you can recover the coverage of the glands and some of the gliding action. And some men are very successful doing foreskin restoration. Others struggle with it for a long time and are less successful. And it depends a lot on the damage that was done. If they've been savagely circumcised and lost a lot of skin and it's tight, it's harder to stretch back and recover some foreskin, restore some foreskin. But it's, men generally are happy about foreskin restoration. They're happy that even to whatever extent they're successful, they're glad they're doing it. They're taking action on their own behalf.
Yeah.
So generally, we recommend that, to people, to men that have been cut. What we don't like to do is give people the sense that, oh, you can cut your baby because he can undo it later. It's fine. Everything will be fine. He can just fix it later. He can't. Not really.
Whenever, I mean, you yourself have a lot of hair yourself. You go to the barber and they're like, "Do you want it shorter?" They're like, we can cut it a little shorter, but we can't put it back.
Exactly.
Exactly. It's like you can cut the foreskin off. You can never put it back. It'll never be the same. It'll never quite operate the same way as it did before. It's not, and it's not like hair where it grows back. It's like the foreskin gone forever. It's like,
and the restoration process can take years of daily care. It's a big undertaking, and it's just like, well, no, we don't want new parents to think that this is a trivial decision they're making that can just be undone. It's a permanent, irrecoverable loss. An amputation, you don't recover from an amputation. You adapt to your loss.
Yeah, people who get their arms amputated, stuff like that. I've met some amputees, and they're like, I've gotten used to it, but it's like I'm pretty sure most of them, are like, I wish, it didn't happen. I wish I didn't have to adjust this way. It's possible, it's manageable, but I'm sure, most amputees are probably like, I really wish I had my arm, leg, whatever back.
Yeah. Nothing beats having the real thing. It's like,
yeah, exactly. And when it comes to the artificial foreskin restoration, isn't it rather costly to do that?
Not particularly. I think the foreskin restoration devices are in the $80 to $100 range, and they last a long time.
Yeah,
and it's the main cost is it's daily. You have to daily put on and remove this device and make sure it's not too tight, and so it takes a lot of care. Take it off when you pee and all of that. And so it's a big commitment, but like I say, most men who restore are very, very glad they did. So
because I know circumcisions are typically in the thousands of dollars, and then you got to pay $80 to $100 to get it back, to get part of it back. So how is that a right figure? Thousands of dollars for circumcision?
We've heard numbers all over the map. I saw one person complaining because the hospital wanted to charge $25,000 for a circumcision. And I thought, good, they're pricing them out of the market so they can't do it. Excellent. Good job on their part. But usually it's less than that. And sometimes it's covered by insurance. In fact, it's usually covered by insurance. And then, in fact, the doctors want it to be covered by insurance, even though it's worthless. Because they collect that money. They want to get it from the insurance company. So
exactly,
it's not as if
That's what I'm sorry.
It's
I don't mean to keep butting in.
yeah. No, it's just it's a real problem that our for-profit medicine is doesn't actually help patients as much as help financial transactions.
Yeah, I know that most people don't quite conceptualize that, just because it's covered by insurance, it doesn't mean the doctors don't get paid. It just means the insurance company themselves are just reimbursing the doctor, which, I find it so dumb that the circumcisions are covered by insurance, where it's a completely unnecessary procedure, whereas, you and I both wearing glasses, maybe one of us wants to get LASIK, and most insurance companies don't cover LASIK. They think it's an optional surgery, it's elective. So either I go pay out of pocket, or I just keep buying glasses every year. Whereas cutting my face off, apparently I don't need it to live through life. Whereas my eyes, we can't even reconstruct the eyes in a laboratory, and they tend to get worse over time, and yet insurance companies are like, just deal with it.
Right. So in 2012, the American Academy of Pediatrics issued a technical report and paper on circumcision, which they've done this every so many years since the 70s. And this was a very deceptive document. It was, but the main thrust of it was that it prevents all kinds of diseases. All of those claims have been challenged. Had been challenged at the time they made them, and they knew that. They knew they were all on thin ice on all of their claims. And but they said it's not necessary, but we want insurance to cover it. Well, of course they do. Of course they do. That's a big money stream. Of course they want it. And then the European doctors, 36 or 38 European leading pediatricians, so the heads of the pediatrics for their nations in Europe and Canada, rebutted this position from the American Academy of Pediatrics and showed how that it was biased and unscientific and it was worthless, just worthless. It's just based on their own, not based on science.
It's more based on their personal interests as opposed to really being based on science.
Right. And so that policy then got used to support. Currently, the CDC has a ruling that doctors should sell circumcision to new parents, and that's based on that 2012 AAP report. Even though it was refuted, it's like this. It's like it's just maddening. I mean, that was refuted, but nobody talks about the refutation. They only talk about the original one because the system is deeply corrupt. I hate to say it because I would like to have better news. I mean, telling people that their country is corrupt is like telling somebody that they have cancer. It's not good news.
It's not easy to share, It's hard for people to understand.
Yeah, it's just deeply, deeply corrupt. And it's something we all have to pay attention to. And it's not fun. Yeah, it's not fun. It's not something you're going to share and everybody's going to get a kick out of it. It's hard, a hard fact.
Yeah, exactly. With science in general, science is always open to the idea that there's new evidence that, rebuts previous ideas. We once believed that geocentrism was, scientifically correct. And the scientists of Galileo's day, they wouldn't even like touch the telescope. They weren't like, let's not look through it, They're like, oh, we'll look through it, like they wouldn't even touch it. They were like, it's like, if he's wrong, what's the worst you're going to do when you look at the evidence he's presented? It's like, but nobody wants to look at the evidence presented. Most pumping this stuff out, they don't want to look at the evidence contrary to their claims. It's
the whole ridiculous. The whole Christian worldview at that time was that God created the world for us humans. And so we're at the center and everything revolves around us because of course we're the only people that matter. Or, we're the center of the universe. This is what a wonderful, what a childish and wonderful concept.
Mm-hmm.
And Galileo, threw a monkey wrench into that little dream.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a real threat to the Catholic Church, because the whole idea of God was that he made everything just for us. Mm-hmm. And Galileo said, no, well, we're not at the center. Mm-hmm. And then it follows that, well, maybe everything isn't just created for us, and maybe we're not that special after all.
Yeah.
And that was a very, undermining idea, and the Catholic Church couldn't handle it. They kept him under house arrest for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
Because he was a threat.
Yeah. I mean, you grew up as I did, believing Pluto was a planet, and then, they realized through scientific methods, it's not its own planet, because of the fact that, it didn't meet certain qualifications. But instead of, my desire to, it's a planet because I grew up with that, it's like I changed what I was pumping out. It's like maybe when I was a kid, it's like, yeah, Pluto's a planet, but then, it eventually got overturned. And most people are unwilling to actually change their worldview when presented new evidence.
It's amazing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that really upset people, and it's like it makes zero difference in your life whether or not Pluto's a planet or a dwarf planet.
Yeah,
but it's amazing. They just it's funny how people get worked up about the strangest things.
Yeah, exactly. It's baffling to me. It's like, how about we just kind of accept the science and move on?
Yeah,
my grandkids are gonna not be as they're not gonna drag their heels as much to certain things like Pluto not being a planet anymore and stuff like that. Whereas, generations, my generation or generations before me are kind of dragging their heels. Same with, when Galileo was running around, generations later, we're like, yeah, the sun is the center of the solar system. Whereas, people before Galileo and his own generation were like, no, you're wrong.
Right. I forgot who it was, but some scientist said that science advances one funeral at a time. Mm-hmm. So it takes the old way has to actually literally die out before the new ideas can flourish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And with circumcision, I'm seeing a lot more intactivist ideas getting spread. It's like, instead of just shutting up and pretending this is really just how it should be, people are starting to kind of question it. And I think, people like Bloodstained Men and Their Friends, Your Whole Baby, some other groups, they're really starting to get this dialogue going. They're starting to get people to start questioning
I mean, that's our mission. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. It's just to get the word out there and wake people up. And some people get it immediately. Some people, it takes a while to sink in, and some people never get it. But it's definitely, there is progress, definitely.
Yeah, every small victory, we grow. Every person who starts to kind of, start conceptualizing that, the foreskin does serve a purpose and it doesn't need to be cut off because it's not imperfect. They start to conceptualize that, and, eventually you're starting to see people not do it. You're starting to see the societal norm of, uncut men. It's starting to grow, as opposed to, like, that's gross. Now people are like, I mean, there's really nothing wrong. You're going to start seeing more and more people understand that, it doesn't have to be cut to look nice. I mean, is that really why we do anything? Just aesthetics, especially to children.
Yep. And it's such a subjective thing, whether something looks good to you or not. What looks good to people is what you're used to from your own culture. So,
mm-hmm. Yeah, like in some cultures, men, like men wear robes. We don't, but I mean, that doesn't mean the robe is any less like valid because of the fact that we wear pants instead of robes.
Yeah.
And then, what are have you guys ever, encountered like a mother on the road that, has decided to change their mind?
Yes, it happens. It definitely happens. In fact, sometimes we come to a city for a second time and somebody will come up to us and say, we saw you a couple of years ago, and because we saw you, we kept our son intact, and we're so glad we didn't have to go through all that, and he's happy, and it's just like, well, great. I mean, it's beautiful. That's the whole idea. That the whole point is to keep these boys intact. Mm-hmm. Don't let them get traumatized. Yeah. Don't harm them for life. Just let them grow up and be who they are.
Yeah. And with I mean, I'm sure you probably get some negative reception too.
Oh yeah, people get heckle us, and sometimes it's kind of uncomfortable out there.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, uh, we we just stand our ground and explain everything that to anybody that's open minded. And
Mm-hmm.
if they want to just heckle us, well, we'll just ignore them.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get counter protesters, and of those people, about a third of the time, we talk to them and they come around. They realize we convince them that their idea was misinformed.
One third.
But about two thirds of the about
really
2/3 of the time that doesn't. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's like they know there's something going on and they want to participate, but you just kind of have to bring them in and say, well, no, your idea was actually
Mm-hmm.
doesn't make sense for these reasons, and
Yeah.
eventually, yeah,
Yeah.
it's
You
great
guys.
fun.
Yeah, you guys have definitely gotten your message out there. Again, Bloodstained Men and Their Friends was the way I opened the door to like intactivism, as opposed to just like sharing with my peers my thoughts. It's like, no, instead of just sharing a few studies I found, it's like, you guys have tons and tons of studies on your site that show, you have all this scientific evidence, where it's like, as for me, I have like dozens, but not, like, I don't have as extensive a library. I definitely don't have I mean, I'm doing this all myself. I don't have a bunch of people sending me this information, and I don't have a lot of people researching it for me. I'm doing this myself. And now it's nice to see, there are other people saying the same thing I am, whereas opposed to people just like, you're the only one talking about it, so you're crazy.
Right. And yeah, exactly. And well, it's so good that you are.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, our resources we've redone our website recently and added a lot of resources. And another good source is Doctors Opposing Circumcision. They have
Mm-hmm.
from the point of view of intactivist doctors, or doctors who don't want to cut foreskins,
Mm-hmm.
and they've got very good information, and it's all done from the point of view of medical authorities. Whereas none of us are doctors; we're all just
Yeah.
activists.
Exactly. It's definitely nice to see, someone who's actually in that position and can actually conceptualize that better doing that, as opposed to just, me, some Jewish kid who's cut and, like who's against it, but, doesn't really have the scientific means to get there because of the fact that I'm not a doctor. I haven't studied it as in depth as a doctor does. It's not that I don't know anything. It's just a doctor's going to know a lot more, because doctors typically have to go through a lot more schooling and intense training.
Right. Right.
But that
Yeah,
is
there's been a long history of Jews who were against circumcision. It's not back in the 80s. Edward Wallerstein wrote this book, Circumcision: An American Health Fallacy, in the 80s. Dr. Fleiss, who was called the pediatrician to the stars, he was a pediatrician in Beverly Hills, and he was totally against circumcision, and would tell these parents, if you want to cut your boy, you're going to have to find another pediatrician, because I'm not going to. We have very different ideas about medicine, and you can't be I don't want you as my patient if you're going to cut your boy.
Mm-hmm.
So he's passed now, but he was great.
Mm-hmm.
There have been Joseph Lewis, who was actually Jewish. He wrote this in the 1940s or 30s, In the Name of Humanity, about all kinds of genital mutilation, the history of genital mutilation.
Jewish was Jewish himself.
Yeah, he was Jewish.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's like you're going to get a lot of people that say, people against circumcision are anti-Semitic, but seeing one of our own kind of push back is really nice.
Right. I mean, it's the first line of defense is that, oh, it's because you hate us. Well, no, actually, we just want you guys to have the best life you can have. So it's not because we hate you, but but. Well, the thing is, it's a defense reaction to say that, and we understand that it hurts because it just hurts. But we have to understand that that's going to be the first line of defense. That you're haters.
Yeah, exactly.
And so
it's kind of like
this was another great book was by Leonard Glick called "Marked in Your Flesh." Circumcision from Ancient Judea to Modern America. And
Mm-hmm.
this was published by Oxford University Press. It's really good, but it's scholarly but readable. And he's a Jewish professor who just analyzed the whole story of circumcision,
Mm-hmm.
and and just in the end, he said it's not consistent with Jewish values
Mm-hmm.
because, from his sense of what Jews value, this does not
Mm-hmm.
align with it.
Yeah.
So that's a good resource for Jewish.
Yeah.
And the other thing that he said that was very interesting was that the first version of the covenant was in Genesis 15,
Mm-hmm.
and the covenant at that time kept with an animal sacrifice, not
Mm-hmm.
with circumcision.
Yeah.
And about 1100 years later, Genesis 17 was added, and they changed the story and required a human sacrifice, circumcision, instead.
Mm-hmm.
So those two versions of Genesis are both there. So I mean, if you, it's like, well, pick the one you like. I'd pick the animal. I'd just go out and kill an animal, a rodent or something. It's like, okay, that's done. We don't have to harm our boy. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, his story is really interesting, and definitely worth reading.
Mm-hmm.
Another one on the religious. This is by Janet Heimlich, wrote a book called "Breaking the Will: Shedding Light on Religious Child Maltreatment."
Mm-hmm.
And she goes into lots of cults and Christian and Jewish things, but her idea about circumcision is that it's using the child as a prop
Mm-hmm.
for a right that, and the child should not be used in that way. It's child maltreatment in
Mm-hmm.
her. It's what she calls religious child maltreatment.
Yeah.
So lots of Jewish thinkers have been thinking about this for a long time, and we just. Another one is Ronald Goldman,
Mm-hmm.
a psychologist, wrote Circumcision, the Hidden Trauma, about the psychological effects of circumcision. And he also wrote Questioning Circumcision, a Jewish Perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was specifically, I don't have a copy of that one, but
Yeah.
specifically from the perspective of Jewish families.
Yeah.
Anyway, lots of Jews have been thinking about that. They're not anti-Semitic. They're
Mm-hmm.
not. They just want the
Mm-hmm.
best for themselves and their people. And
Yeah. Myself
humanism
included.
is, yeah. It's like it's the humanist movement and the Enlightenment in general. It's like this is a good thing. This is a
Mm-hmm.
net benefit for humanity, no matter who you are. And
Yeah.
we just try to emphasize the human rights and focus on the positive. And I know that people sometimes want to cast us as hateful people, but protecting kids from harm is not hate.
Mm-hmm.
It's not hate.
Yeah, exactly. And like I was trying to say earlier, with the pool, it's like you think it's so deep, and then you just, you're able to just stand in the water. People are afraid of drowning, and yet, it's like, oh, I get in, and it's like, like 2 inches deep.
It's safe.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like you can go down this rabbit hole. You're supposed to. That's what life is. You're supposed to explore it. It's not meant to just be one way. Some people, with but yeah, going back to the whole religion thing, people say, it's in the Bible, that circumcision's in the Bible. But if you look at Paul's writings, he's like, circumcision, it's not necessary for salvation. It's not necessary for really anything. It's more so just like a custom, but it's not so much necessary for salvation anymore.
Right. So that Paul freed, and basically, I think that's when Christianity really split from Judaism, is that once Paul said circumcision's not required anymore,
Mm-hmm.
then the two, I mean, before that, Christians were a Jewish sect.
Yeah.
After that, after Paul, they become a separate religion. So it's
Yeah.
really circumcision or the foreskin that caused Christianity to become a standalone religion.
Yeah, exactly. Most people just saw it, Romans especially, they just saw Christians as, this obscure Jewish denomination, like how some people see, ironically Seventh Day Adventists, which is what Kellogg was to regular Christianity. That's how they saw that's how they saw Christianity to Judaism. And Paul himself, was Jewish. He believed in all these things. He was a devout Jew before he, had his conversion story and all of that. And yet, what's funny is just Paul's like, no, it's not necessary anymore. It's been done away with. So why are we doing it? It doesn't profit your soul or your kid's soul or whoever. It's not as profitable as it was, back in the old covenant days.
Right, right. So, and there's a movement in Israel. There's a gentleman, Alon Sevroni, who wears the bloodstain outfit in Tel Aviv, holds up these signs in Hebrew that say, stop circumcision. It's a terrible thing. I'm not sure exactly the text because I don't read Hebrew, but he's out there. It's hard.
Yeah.
But anyway, he's actually wearing the bloodstained suit in Israel, and so I mean, which takes a lot of courage because that's a hostile audience, I think.
Exactly, especially because you've got the really devout Jews in Israel, and some of them do tend to, some of the more ultra orthodox sects, they tend to actually kind of be more radical and pushing back negatively, as opposed to more just like you see a lot of like Orthodox Jewish sects in the United States that are more just insular, but in Israel they tend to be more vocal, more aggressive, and stuff like that.
Yeah, he's got a lot of courage.
Exactly, I admire. I've never met the guy, but I admire him.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But it just shows that even in what would be the most hostile place for the message, it's there. It's there.
Yeah.
It's not. And it's we're getting more media attention all the time. Andrew Yang was running for president. He said the intactivists are right. It's like news because the first time a presidential candidate had even mentioned our issue. And so we were really grateful for him for that because most other politicians just won't touch it.
Yeah,
so it's progress.
My major was political science, and it's like I definitely want to get into politics, influence policy, So it's like it's nice to know that there was someone before me who pushed this, who had such a big platform, and it's really nice that probably I'm 22, so I'm not running for office for a long time, but if I ever did, it's like I'm sure since Andrew Yang publicized it, he was in the media for a while too. He wasn't just one of those they shrugged off to the side. He was pretty popular, and yet he
was a contender. Yeah, he could have. I mean, it was if he had been on the ballot when they got to me, I would have voted for him just on that basis alone. I mean, he had a lot of good ideas.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's like it's nice that because of how popular he was, people are actually able to kind of look into this issue before I ever have to touch the issue. I mean, someone as popular as Andrew Yang talking about it, an issue that most people aren't familiar with. There are, the well has been poisoned to a degree, but it's not as popular now to poison the well. People, what you'll often see with various groups and ideas, they'll have a rebuttal for it. So by the time, someone who, could hear this information hears it, they immediately know how to dismiss it and have their own rebuttals, as opposed to, like, I've never heard that before, I'm going to look behind the scenes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think. I mean, there's whatever when you launch your political career, it's like, it's probably not going to be the main issue, but just you can just sort of bring it along with you. That would be great.
Exactly. It doesn't hurt to mention it. Now, I know that I've heard that the Jewish procedure for circumcision is different than the one in the hospital. Is that something you're too familiar with, or no?
So the story, as I understand it, is this: that originally the Jewish circumcision was they would cut off just the overhanging part, that extended beyond the glands, And of course, this is damaging because there's muscle and tissue and sensitivity there. It's the most sensitive part of the penis is right there. But anyway, that's what they did originally.
Mm-hmm.
And then during the ancient Greek period, there were Jews who wanted to compete in the Greek athletic events, which were always done in the nude.
Mm-hmm.
And in Greece at that time, you weren't considered, a man wasn't considered naked in the sense of being exposed indecently unless his glands showed. If the glands was covered, it wasn't. It was, he was nude, but it wasn't indecent. Because if the glands showed, then it showed that he was aroused in public, which was what they considered indecent. So there was a problem for the Jews because their glands could show when they're competing, and that this was considered indecent. So they would pull the remaining foreskin forward and then tie it with a little leather strap so that they could compete and not feel awkward about it. But this aroused the ire of the elders and the Jewish elders, and they came up with this radical circumcision that removed the entire foreskin instead of that, so that their sons couldn't, look like they were intact when they competed in games in ancient Greece. So then that radical, really much more destructive circumcision became widely practiced, and that's what's practiced by American medicine today.
Wow, I didn't know that ancient Greece story. You do learn something new every day. Yeah, that's really interesting that they did change it over time because of cultural significance, not so much because of religious significance. It's some people just like to conform to the society around them, and that's really baffling.
Yeah, and when they say, "Well, this is in the Bible, we can't possibly touch it," well, they've already changed it. They made it worse. So if you can make it worse, you can make it better by not cutting them at all. It's
Yeah.
my suggestion.
Exactly. And now, as we explained before, like as we kind of touched on before, if like now, you or Bloodstained Men, I'm not sure, if your ideas on this are different, but let's say, like a 27-year-old male wanted to get circumcised, would you support legislation that prohibits that, or is it just pertaining to?
No, I mean that's an elective body modification, like a tattoo. And people understand tattoos. You don't let parents tattoo their children because the children has a right to make his own decisions about his body. And you don't let children get tattoos until they're of an age where they have judgment, where they like 18, where they can understand what they're doing.
I know in some states, it's like a certain age with parental permission, but I don't know that that's reflective of them all. But yeah, you've got a good point, that tattoos are, a way of, marking the child, and yet, they're not ready yet.
And it's prohibited. It's illegal. So I mean, it's like, that's a good model. If you did the same with circumcision, you don't do it to kids because they probably don't want it. You don't let kids elect on their own that this is what they want because they haven't reached an age of maturity to make that kind of decision. And when they reach the age of adulthood, then if that's still what they want, well, then that's up to them.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I stand. It's like, I mean, you want to do that, and you're fully conscious and you're fully consenting, and the only person at risk is yourself. Go for it. It's like that's your business. But it's like when you bring a child into it, I don't think that's okay. It's like a child can't properly consent to anything. A child tends to often be uninformed. They kind of just do it because, mom and dad were like, do it.
Yeah. And parents have a duty to protect their child from harm. So they have a duty not to allow damaging surgery.
Yeah. How long have you been in the intactivist community?
Since the 90s. When the FGM law was being debated, that's when I really got interested in participating. One other thing about adulthood decisions in the FGM law, because the fear was that women could be pressured to subject themselves. to female genital mutilation that I don't think even women, even grown adult women, can be have a clitorectomy under the FGM law.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting that the idea of adult decision making there is,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess the reason was that they thought people would be that women weren't really free to choose.
Yeah.
They would be, yeah.
Now, yeah, I mean, and that's just really crazy to me, that women can't be circumcised, but men can. Now, given you know a lot about circumcision, given how you're very active in Bloodstained Men and Their Friends, you and I both know that it leaves a lot of scarring. Can you go into more detail about that?
Right. So there's, depending on the method they use, there's either a big scar or a narrow scar, but there's a scar there that where healthy, highly erogenous tissue should have been and once was. And so that's the physical scar, and then there's a mental scar. I mean, any trauma you do to a child, that trauma doesn't just disappear. It's like it's marked in their mind forever. So you don't want to, especially a newborn, you just don't want to traumatize that they're so vulnerable, and they just need to be held and kept warm and fed and have the mother's breast and everything. A knife to the genitals is the last thing that should happen to someone who's so vulnerable and needy. And so, the psychological scars, that's just
terrible. Yeah, that's just absurd, that we allow that to happen to such a small child and for no really good reason. There's no really good reason as to why that needs to be done. As we were talking about earlier, there's no real reason that a child should have their genitals mutilated at such a young age. It's not practical. It's not useful. It's literally just because, one guy in the 19th century had, crazy ideas about sexuality and popularized them in, a bunch of, nonsensical documents pointing this out. And, they're like, oh, well, Kellogg, he was a doctor and he knew what he was talking about. I'm like, well, also, there was a time where we once believed bloodletting was a great idea. That's how, if I remember correctly, how George Washington died, because they're like, he's sick, drain his blood. And it's like,
take more blood.
Yeah, and then it's like, we find out that, it's like draining the blood is the worst thing you can really do when someone's sick, as opposed to, like, hey, this is a great practical solution. Let's do it.
Yeah, and they just didn't know. They have an excuse. They didn't know, but there's no excuse today.
Exactly.
There's no excuse. Of ignorance is no longer a defense.
Exactly. We used to have forms of medicine, where, you face some sort of pain and, you would take it, and then it's like, it ends up that medicine actually makes you more sick because it might contain mercury in there. It's like, sure, it's temporary relief, but it's like, I don't see why, some 19th century study that's been debunked time and time and time and time again is still, what a lot of people are citing as legitimate. It's just absurd. It's absurd that people are citing these sources as legitimate when they're so outdated and they've been debunked.
Right. And the most shameful thing was the AAP 2012 attempt to get funding for circumcision when they knew better.
Yeah,
they couldn't not have known better.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It's just shameful,
especially with the internet. It's much easier to access raw information, from your pocket, and yet we're still having this discussion when we can easily access information that shows it's wrong.
Yeah, another part of the problem is that a cut dad who hasn't really dealt with the fact that he's been injured is often going to want to insist that his son is cut, and not always, but often. And so that's the problem. And the only way to counter that is for the mother to say, "No way in hell are you going to cut my boy," and that's just not going to happen. So you're going to choose between me and you're going to. It's my way or the highway on this one. It's the boy is going to stay intact.
Yeah.
And that's, because the father hasn't really come to grips with the harm that was done to him, he's still in his way of denying the harm is by forcing it on his son, and it's a real hard discussion, and it's really hard. I mean, it's marriages have broken up over this.
Yeah, and it's like it's hard to admit, like sometimes you don't want to look back and admit that. I had this coworker, I'll change her name. Let's call her Jane. Jane was like, like she and I were talking about it at work. Surprisingly, I don't know why, but Jane's like, yeah, my son's circumcised because his father kept insisting on it. And I'm like, Jane, I've done research. I can show you this information that shows that circumcision's wrong. And she's like, oh, I have to go see that. And Jane was actually shocked. And it's like, why the heck, are we still doing this? It's like a father, it's like, I don't have it, and I don't want to feel bad that I don't have it. I'm going to make sure my son doesn't really have it either. So, I don't feel as bad about it.
Yeah. I mean, if he was missing an eye, would he insist that one of his son's eyes be gouged out? I mean, it's just madness.
Like an amputation, his arms, his arms off. And then, my son needs to get his arm cut off too. It's ridiculous.
It's madness.
Yeah. Is there anything you'd want to say or any points you'd want to make?
Just it's the circumcision harms everyone. It harms the boy. It harms the relationship between the boy and his mother. It harms the father when he realizes that he was harmed, and it's a devastating blow for him. It wrecks sex for a lot of people. It damages sex for everyone, that both partners. Mm-hmm. There's no reason for it to continue, and we will be on the streets of Pennsylvania streets in October, and leading up to a medical conference in Philadelphia, and so that we'll be out there, and if anybody here is from Pennsylvania or wants to join us, our schedule is on our website, bloodstainedmen.com, and we'd love to meet more intactivists.
Yeah, and if I wanted to, because I can't travel all the time. I have commitments that don't always allow me to travel. Let's say I wanted to wear the outfit and pass out literature. Is that allowed by the group?
Oh, sure. Yeah. In fact, we have do-it-yourself intactivism instructions on our website. So we have cards and signs that you can print from our instructions on how to print them from our webpage, and also instructions on how to make the costume. It's real easy. You just basically get red paint and
water it down
and
a little.
Use white,
and throw it on
white painter's paint.
Like I myself, I'm familiar with the organization. I found it years ago. I've read, a lot of your literature. I've done this stuff, but I definitely want to make sure, people do know how to check the website out, and see that, it's not a requirement to officially be, in the pack, so to say. And they can,
right. I mean, it's Americans have the right to protest anything that they want to. This is the brilliance of American free speech, and we encourage them to if you understand circumcision and understand it's wrong, to go ahead and protest it. It's the more people who are doing that, the better.
Yeah. And could you plug the site again just to make sure?
It's bloodstainedmen.com.
Any hyphens or anything, or just one word?
No, just one word. Yeah.
Yep. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for the opportunity to really enlighten people about this. I'm so appreciative that you took time to actually talk about this, and for all the knowledge you've given me as well as many other people.
Well, it's been a real treat to be on your show, Moishe, and thank you so much.
Yep. You have a good one.
You too. Bye. Bye now.